Guys, it is our last lecture, chapter 16, law and ethics. So, why are we having a section on law and ethics? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, just like I told you with personality, the section's a beast. You should probably pay attention. Because law and ethics play a huge role in any psychologist or any helping profession. I don't care if you're a teacher, a psychologist, a doctor, a police officer, firefighter. There's going to be ethics in place. And ethics aren't just rules that you follow because they're the right thing to do. They're things that if you break, you can get in some serious frickin' trouble. Okay? And so I want to cover some of this stuff and also dispel some myths around laws involving this stuff, because abnormal psychology invariably runs up against the law. Okay? It runs up against the law all the time. People with mental disorders find themselves dealing with the law all the time. And whether that's a good thing or not, whether that's the way it should be or not, it is the truth. Okay? And people who work with people who have mental disorders find themselves dealing with the law all the time. And if you don't work with people who have mental disorders, but you happen to be a person who works with the law, guess what? You work with people who have mental disorders. Because even people who are not intending to be criminal may end up running afoul of the law, and it may be completely due to their mental disorder, right? But the fact of the matter is, this is something we have to address and we have to cover. So, let's get started. 1, insanity. Have you heard the term insanity? What does insanity mean? Well, insanity has absolutely no psychological definition. There is no such word in psychology or psychiatry. We don't use that word. We never have used that word. I don't know, maybe back in the 1800s they did. We don't say people are insane. Insanity is a legal word. Insanity is a legal word made up by the courts and used to describe a person who is incompetent to stand trial due to reason of mental defect. That's the legal phrasing. Incompetent to stand trial due to reason of mental defect. So, if a person commits a crime and the court, not the doctors, the court determines that due to some mental defect, it could be a mental disorder, it could be a neurocognitive disability, it could be a neurodevelopmental disability, it could be whatever the court decides is a disability. If the court decides that because of that, this person is not capable of being present in their own legal defense and was not capable of understanding that what they were doing was against the law, then they are not competent to stand trial. And that is what insane means. Insane has nothing to do with your level of mental disorder. You will never hear a psychologist, any ethical psychologist, any psychologist that should be practicing, you'll never hear a psychologist call somebody insane. Psychologists don't call people insane. Judges call people insane. Okay? So first things first, let's get this out of the way. There's no such thing as insanity in psychology. Insanity exists in a courtroom only. All right? So let me tell you a story. Way back when, I was a young homicide detective. Because when I first started being a detective, before I moved to sex crimes, I was in homicide. Okay? And one night I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning to go and respond to a crime scene because they had had an attempted homicide. It actually wasn't a completed homicide. A guy who had been in prison for the last 20 years, had gotten out recently, had shot his grandma twice. Okay? And so I got to the police station where they had him in custody, and the guy surrendered peacefully, and the grandma lived. The guy surrendered peacefully. When the cop showed up, he was standing outside smoking a cigarette with his hands out saying, "Cuff me." So I got down to the police station and I sat down to talk to him. I started speaking to this man, and I asked him. I said, "Hey, you didn't You didn't run or you didn't fight when my colleagues got there. And he said, yeah, man, no, why would I do that? That's a good way to get shot. I'm like, okay, all right, fair enough, fair enough. And I said, well, just so you know, your grandma didn't die. She lived. And he said, damn it. And I said, okay, why damn it? He's like, well, do you think this will be enough to get me back in the joint? Back to prison. Because his whole thing is he wanted to go back to prison. The guy had been in prison his entire life. He was institutionalized. He wanted to be back in prison. He didn't want to be free. He thought if he killed his grandma, they'd send him back to prison for life. And I said, well, you know, I'm pretty sure you go back to prison. I'm not the judge, but I feel confident for you, buddy. He shot her twice. And he shot her with a relatively small gun. And I don't know if you know handguns or not, or pistols, but bullets can be big or small. And the bigger they are, the more damage they do, okay? This is a relatively small gun. But also in the closet was a shotgun. And I said, I got to ask you, why did you choose the small gun instead of the shotgun? And he said, well, I didn't want to wake up the whole neighborhood and have everyone come in there and cause a big thing. I'm like, okay. All right, fair enough, bud. So we arrest him for attempted murder, send him off to jail, and go to court. But 6 months later, we're sitting in court, and his lawyer has put forth an insanity defense, saying that clearly the man is not capable, due to some mental defect, to stand trial. And so they call in expert witnesses who have spoken to the guy in their offices and stuff, and the prosecution has one expert who says, oh no, he's he probably has antisocial personality disorder, but he's very well aware of what he did being wrong, and so yeah, no, he needs to stand trial. And then of course the defense's witness says, well, you know, actually we believe he may have been psychotic at the time and he wasn't in touch with reality, so he actually had no concept of what he did being right or wrong. And they put me on the stand and they asked me, well, what did he say to you? And I said, well, he told me that he didn't run from the cops because he didn't want to get shot. He told me that he chose the smaller gun because he was trying to avoid waking up the neighbors. And he told me that he was disappointed that she didn't die because he was really hoping to get life in prison. And the reason why I said all those things was because I was saying, listen, he's got rational thought, planning here, right? What he did was evil, but it was rationally planned out. He knew right from wrong. He had a plan. He's not legally insane. He may be mentally ill, but he's not insane. And in my opinion, as a cop, he needs to stand trial. And so they go back and forth and they talk about it and they talk about it. And I get excused, and then the lawyers talk about it, and there's lots of talking and calling. And lawyers love to talk, right? And they get all this done. Finally, I get a call from the prosecuting attorney, and the attorney says, okay, we're done. We don't need you to come testify anymore. I said, okay, good. So what's the deal? And they said, well, here's the deal. He's taking a plea for attempted murder for the first shot, okay? And the second shot, we're going to declare him insane. And because the second shot, or excuse me, other way around, the first shot was insane, the second shot was attempted murder. Because the first shot is insane, and that was the first one, we're going to go ahead and send him to Atascadero, which was our mental institution for people who had committed crimes, our Arkham Asylum. So we're going to send him to Atascadero, and until he's declared sane, he'll stay there. Then when he's declared sane, then he can face trial for the second shot. And I said, so you're telling me that in the space of bang, bang, he was insane? And he said, yes. And I said, okay. And that is how insanity works in the court, okay? So when you're asking yourself, does insanity have a place in psychology? No, it doesn't, okay? Because if somebody in the medical or psychological sense is out of touch with reality and psychotic enough that they're not sure of what's going on or sure that what they're doing is right or wrong, that doesn't just turn on and off in the space of two gunshots. But legally it can. So that's kind of my little insanity defense story, so you can kind of understand how it actually works in real court. The insanity defense, or not guilty by or unable to stand trial due to reason of mental defect, is incredibly uncommon. The movies and the media would have you believe that it's used all the frickin' time, right? It represents a tiny, tiny fraction of actual criminal defenses. And when it is used, it's almost always unsuccessful. Even in the case that I had it, his lawyer, of course, wanted him completely freed. He's locked up in a mental institution for the rest of his life, and if he ever decides that he's not insane anymore, then he's going to be locked up in prison for the rest of his life. Either way, he's not going to see daylight again. So, you know, the people walking away scot-free because they claimed to be insane, and the court that is very, very, very rare. I've never seen it in my law enforcement career. And even when it is successful, and by successful I mean the judge says, okay, this person cannot stand criminal trial, it almost always results in a mental commitment. Like I said, the person got sent to Atascadero. So yes, he's not going to San Quentin, the prison, he's going to Atascadero. So instead of wearing an orange jumpsuit, he's going to wear a white jumpsuit, and he's going to take medicine all day. So, you know, it's not exactly like, you know, he gets to go scot-free and go back home and play on his PS5. Okay. So the insanity defense is very dramatic for movies and movies and TV, but the reality of it is usually unsuccessful, and it is very, very, very rare. Speaking of Atascadero and getting sent to a mental institution, when can the government decide that you need mental health treatment? Not you, not your family. When does the government get to decide that you get to be forced into mental health treatment? Because Atascadero isn't exactly the Hilton Hawaiian. You know, I mean, you can't leave. There's bars on the doors and windows. You're locked in a cell. It's just a medical cell, right? So at what point does the government get to step in and tell you that you need medical treatment or you need psychological treatment? Remember how mad a lot of people got at the mandatory vaccine rules that came out? And how people pushed back against that? And some people were like, no, it's the right thing. It's what we should do. And other people were like, no, you can't tell me what to do with my body, right? There's a reason that debate happened. And the reason is people aren't sure that the government should be telling them what they can do with their body. But on the other hand, the government tells you what you can do with your body all the time, right? It tells you you cannot put methamphetamine in your body. You cannot put heroin in your body. It tells you that. And if you do it, you're breaking the law, right? The government tells you you have to wear a seatbelt when you drive. Who are you hurting if you don't wear a seatbelt? You. I mean, I'm going to tell you right now, I've seen plenty of car accidents. I think if you don't wear a seatbelt, you're an idiot. But if you don't wear a seatbelt, you're not hurting anyone but you. But the government can stop you in your driving, halt you from where you're going, make you late to where you're going, and fine you, write you a freaking ticket, and make you pay it to the government for not wearing a seatbelt. Because the government knows what's better for your body than you. I'm not saying that they shouldn't, because in most places these laws were voted on. And so if this is what the people wanted, this is what the people wanted. But when it comes to taking you out of your home and locking you in a facility for mental health treatment, at what point does that decision not become yours or your family's anymore? Well, the answer is actually pretty cut and dry. So when it is determined that due to mental defect, you are, and that's a legal term, due to mental defect, you are a danger, an immediate danger to yourself or to other people around you. So in other words, you are actively suicidal, or you have major depression and you are actively suicidal, or you are so psychotic that you do not know not to run into traffic, or you are in the midst of a very, very bad paranoid delusion and you believe that you have to kill these people to save your own life. In those cases, you are a threat to yourself, an immediate threat to yourself, and an immediate threat to others. Different jurisdictions handle it differently. In the jurisdiction that I worked, they would send a police officer out. The police officer would come out, evaluate the person, and determine based on their opinion, and I can tell you, having been a police officer, the average cop doesn't have a PhD in psychology, but based on their opinion, this person is a threat to themselves or threat to others, and can then take that person into custody, put handcuffs on them, put them in a police car, and drive them to a hospital and forcibly commit them for 72 hours. And then when they get in there, a psychologist comes in and evaluates them and determines if the commitment should hold or not for 72 hours. It is not a criminal penalty, so you aren't charged with any crime, but yet, if you resist, the government is authorized to use force, just like if you were getting arrested. So you could be tased, you could be pepper sprayed, you could be struck with a baton, you could be wrestled down to the ground. Okay? Now, I've been in these situations before, dealing with severely mentally ill people who are also a threat to me. Just because somebody is mentally ill does not mean that they are not dangerous. It also does not mean that they're not worthy of respect and treatment. But unfortunately, at that moment, at that time, when that person has a knife and wants to put it in me, it's not a time for treatment. It's a time to resolve the situation and hopefully get to treatment later, right? But that's from my perspective as the cop. If we look at it from the family's perspective, you call the police, or you call 911. Not necessarily the police, you call 911 because your family member was having a mental crisis. They're having a psychotic break from reality. They sent the police showed up, and now they're in a violent confrontation with the person that you called to get help for, right? You can understand why this is a bad look, right? It doesn't play well. It doesn't look good in the press. It doesn't look good for the family. The family doesn't like it. And I can tell you as the cop, we don't like it either, okay? Is it necessary? Well, just about every jurisdiction I'm aware of, including Honolulu, HPD, has some type of mental health commitment rule. Here they call it MH1, Mental Health 1. In California, we called it 5150, Health and Welfare, Welfare and Institutions Code 5150, 5150. And to this day, the term 5150 is used to mean somebody who has mental illness. You heard somebody, they'll get tattooed 5150 on their hands and stuff, right? So, can the government order you into treatment? Yeah, it can. That is for a period of 72 hours unless something happens, and then they can petition to get you held longer. And this can all be entirely against somebody's will. But the onus is on the state to show that this person is in fact a threat to themselves. Does the police officer have any carry any liability for it? Not unless that they can show that the police officer acted with complete wanton disregard for that person's health and well-being. They showed up, they just don't like the way this guy talked to them, so they put him under this mental health hold. But when the police officer writes a report and says, hey, look, I showed up, this person was seeing things that weren't there. I'm no psychologist, but he was seeing things that weren't there. He was talking to things that weren't there, and he was saying he was going to kill everybody. So I took him to the people that know more than I do. And then at that point, it's passed off to a psychologist who will come in and do a further evaluation. Some of these mental health commitment holds, they get released after 24 hours because the psychologist comes in and says, nah, it's okay. It was a drug-induced thing. He'll be fine. Sometimes they're released when they shouldn't be. I've had people who I took in because they said they were suicidal. The psychologist releases them and they kill themselves right outside the hospital. I've had that happen. It's a sticky, ugly situation. There is not a good answer for it, but the bottom line is, yes, the government can, when there is a threat to your life or the lives of those around you, step in and force mental health commitment. So, another law, popular thing for people to quote, doctor-patient privilege, doctor-patient confidentiality. This is the idea, and this is true also with priests or other clergy people and lawyers. This is the idea that anything you share with this person is confidential and protected and cannot be shared with the law. Does it exist? Yes, it absolutely does. There is a thing called doctor-patient confidentiality, or doctor-patient privilege, or therapist-patient privilege, or parishioner clergy privilege, or lawyer client privilege, whatever you want to call it. It's privileged communication. And what you share with your therapist cannot be shared with anybody else. Can't be shared with your wife, can't be shared with your husband, can't be shared with your kids, can't be shared with the cops, can't be shared with the fact that you were even in there talking to your therapist can't be shared. Okay? Your name can't be shared. Nothing about it. Everything is confidential and privileged. which is cool, right? Right up until it's not confidential and privileged. Because the law provides exceptions to these privileged communications that say if the communication provided by the patient, in this case, alerts the therapist to an immediate threat to that person or their family, just like that 72-hour commitment, to that person or the people around them or somebody else, right? Then that therapist not only can, but actually has a legal obligation to notify law enforcement and the authorities. They have a legal obligation to notify the law about this threat. And so I'm totally making something up here. Let's say somebody goes into their therapist and they say, and they're severely psychotic and they're paranoid and they think that a local church, pick a religion, I don't care, the members of this local church are out to get them, and they're going to go this Saturday and they're going to wipe out the church, right? And they leave the office. If that therapist does not call law enforcement, does not call the authorities and alert them to the potential threat that they just heard, then that therapist is criminally liable for what that person does later. Civilly liable, certainly, but criminally liable as well. And they can lose their license. That is a breach of ethics. When you break one of the ethics rules as a psychologist or a doctor or an attorney, when you break one of the ethics rules, you can lose your ability to practice. They can take your badge if you're a cop. They can take your license if you're a therapist. They can kick you out of teaching, do all sorts of things to you. So you can lose your ability to practice. You can suffer penalties, financial penalties from whatever ethical body governs you. In the case of psychology, it's the APA. They can actually fine you. And if you want to stay a member, and you want to stay a member if you're a psychologist, they will fine you. You can suffer civil penalties, which means you can be sued. And you can suffer criminal penalties, which means you can go to prison. Okay? So violating the rules of ethics is a bad, bad idea. And they're tough to navigate. Because if you violate doctor-patient, that's also a breach of ethics. So you have to know when you can and when you can't. And as the person receiving therapy, as the patient, you should also probably be aware of when you're creating a situation where you activate the duty to warn. So, although if you are in that situation, I would really rather you just did it so we could get you some help and save some people's lives. But so the doctor or the therapist does have a duty to warn, a duty to alert if the patient discloses a threat to themselves or other people. That includes to themselves. If they say, hey, I'm going to go home and kill myself, or even I feel like killing myself today. I've gone to psychologist's office where they've called from their office, and I've responded to the office and the patient is sitting there, and I've walked in and said, okay, what's going on? And the therapist has said, okay, this is my client Bob, and Bob has expressed a desire to kill himself today. And they've all kind of worked out with each other how this is going to work, and he's got Bob calmed down. I'm like, all right, Bob, well, I'm Joe, and we're going to go to the hospital today, and I'll handcuff you outside. We'll just go outside, try and keep it cool. I've also had it go very unpleasantly, where the person has left and gone back to their apartment, and the doctor called and said, hey, look, I think this guy's going to go shoot up a school, and we have to show up there in force to try and do this civil commitment. That's the duty to warn. Also, an exception to doctor-patient is court order. Doctor-patient doesn't exist if a judge says it doesn't. People don't realize how much power the court has. So let's say I'm trying to track a suspect, a serial rapist. This is a real case. So I'm trying to track a serial rapist, and I know for a fact that according to one of his girlfriends, he goes to the same group therapy session every week. If I walk in there and I say, hi, Detective Rangel, I would like to know if this person comes to group therapy every week, and when it is, and where it is, and all these things, they're not going to tell me jack squat. Doctor-patient. So I have to go to a judge, make my case to a judge, write a big old long report, write a search warrant the judge looks at it, the judge reads it, he goes over it. It'll be probably about 20, 40 pages long. He'll go over it, make me swear to it that everything I said was true. And then when he does, he will write a court order ordering this therapist to release the records that I'm demanding. And then I will go in there and I will say to the therapist, hello, I have a court order regarding this patient of yours. I need their records. I need their information. At that point, the therapist is totally absolved of any legal reason to keep confidentiality. And in fact, if they don't, then they're going to be criminally liable for violating a court order. And so then they're going to give it up. So just so you know, your doctor-patient only goes as far as the court order says. I had a case and schools too have to keep stuff confidential. I had a case where I was unfortunately investigating a college student, and I went to the admissions office of this particular college, and I showed the kid behind the desk at admissions the court order saying, hey, I need all this person's records. And he said, I can't give those to you. They're confidential. I said, I have a court order. He says, I can't give those to you. And I'm like, kid, you're going to get arrested here, and I'm going to come back there and get them anyway. So people know one half, they know the confidentiality part, they don't know the other half, the exceptions to the confidentiality part. So those are things that maybe you might want to know in the next couple of weeks. Okay. Ethics when it comes to research. So every researcher, at some point, you're going to have to do some research. It could be for a bachelor's capstone project. It could be for a master's thesis. It could be for a doctorate. But at some point, you're going to have to do some research. And I mean research other than going to your library. You're actually going to have to deal with human subjects. Every college has what's called an IRB, which is an acronym. It basically comes down to an ethics review board, where the rules of ethics are stated, and this board takes your research plan and reads it and talks to you and interviews you and determines whether or not your research meets ethical guidelines. You are not prohibited, you are not allowed at any college in the United States of America, for any institution, to conduct research with humans before getting approval from that governing ethics body. If you do, it's considered a breach of ethics. Remember all that stuff I said that could happen to you before? Yeah, that could happen to you. So you don't want to do that. So what kind of things would you need to send to the ethics committee? Well, anytime you're dealing with human subjects, I don't care if you're just handing them tests. I don't care if you're doing the Coke Pepsi challenge. It's a very common undergrad level research. We'll do the blindfolded Coke Pepsi challenge. Which one tastes better, right? You're still going to need approval from an ethics board. It's quick, but you're still going to need it. In addition to that, you're going to need special approval if your research involves what they call special populations. Those are children, the very old, the emotionally or mentally vulnerable, people who have, if you're studying people with clinical depression and you're recruiting people with clinical depression, they would be considered emotionally vulnerable, right? If you're studying PTSD, they would be considered emotionally vulnerable. My doctoral thesis was on people with PTSD, so I was a special population. And state prisoners. State prisoners are a popular research target for people because there's a whole host of mental disorders that could be present in the population. And these are people who have, by definition, committed a crime. And so, sometimes they're really heinous or really, really psychologically impactful crimes. And so it's a natural draw for researchers to want to research that population. It is very difficult to get an ethics committee to allow you to research that population. You know what is not a special population and is very easy to get past an ethics committee? College students. College students are the #1 research population in the world. Most research you find is done on college students. And it's really easy. We come forward and we say, hey, look, we're going to give you extra credit if you participate in my research study. All you got to do is fill out this questionnaire. Or you got to fill out this questionnaire and do this little physical test, put the blocks in order or whatever, right? College students, they are research more than anybody else. And there will come a time where you will be in a class where you actually have to participate in a research study. As you get towards the end of your bachelor's degree, I guarantee you will have a class that says, as part of the lab for this class, you must participate in one of these graduate research studies. You got to go find a research study and sign off and go be a guinea pig, right? College students, there are humans, most of you, and so you do have to get approval from the ethics board, but it's very easy and you're not considered a special population. Which is why most research is done on college students, which is really crappy because college students are not a good representation of all populations for research, right? I mean, if I want to study, urban, socioeconomic downturn and the effects on sociopathology in an urban environment. Basically, I'm talking about poor kids from the inner city and the emergence of mental health disorders. College students are not a great source for that because by the very fact that they're college students, they don't necessarily fit the profile of the type of people I want to study, right? So easy population to research, not necessarily the best population to research. That's all I want to say on special populations. Oh, so if you have, let's say you don't want to research a special population. I'm going to do the Coke Pepsi challenge and I'm just going to do college students. I still have to include a demographic survey with every research participant that asks them, hopefully in some artful way, if they are one of the special populations. Have you ever been diagnosed with mental illness? Are you currently a state prisoner? Because if they happen to be special population, even though I'm not researching special populations, I have to exclude them from my study. All right, informed consent. Part of the ethics and legal rules for research is I have to inform all of my research subjects what I'm researching. I have to tell them what I'm studying, how I'm studying it, and what they're going to be expected to do. You're going to fill out a survey. It's expected to take approximately 30 minutes. You're going to have to fill out a survey and push a button when you see a light flash. It's going to take approximately 45 minutes. I have to provide you with informed consent. And then when you read it, you have to sign it and give it back to me, the researcher. Okay? So you have to know as the research subject what you're getting into before I'm allowed to conduct the research. So as the researcher, am I allowed to trick or deceive my subjects? Let's say I had a friend for her master's, she was researching reactions to race, but she told them that she was researching people's mathematical abilities. And so she had one group of people, I'm really simplifying it here, she had one group of people receive their little easy math test from a white volunteer, and another person received it from a black volunteer, and they got their instructions from either a white or a black volunteer. It wasn't the best design study in the world, but she never said that she was trying to research race to them. She told them she was researching math and cognitive ability. Is that okay? Can you do that? Actually, yes. Yes, you can. You can trick or deceive your subjects as long as the ethics committee knows about it beforehand, and as long as the ethics committee has approved it. Because if you're tricking or deceiving them in a way that's going to cause severe psychological distress afterwards, then they're not going to approve it. And no matter whether or not it's going to cause severe psychological stress afterwards, you have to provide resources for them in case they are very hurt or offended by having, or psychologically damaged by having been tricked or deceived. You actually have to provide them with numbers for self-help, suicide hotlines. You have to actually give them resources that they can go to. And at the end of this research, you have to tell them that they were tricked and deceived. So they've all done their research, and then afterwards you have to provide them with another informed consent letter saying, hey, look, so here's the thing. This is what I was actually studying. So I'm sorry you were deceived by that, but I want to thank you for what you're doing. If you are suffering any type of emotional or psychological pain from having been deceived, call this number. So those ethics rules are in place for a reason. Because unchecked research in the pursuit of science has been pretty horrific in the past. I'll give you an example. The Nazis, okay? I don't think anybody's got any problem saying the Nazis were not okay, right? That was pretty bad. That's pretty freaking awful, right? Problem is, the research they were doing on the human body, and I call it research. They were mutilating people. They were performing awful surgeries. They were doing horrible, terrible experiments to humans and doing terrible things. But We learned a lot about how humans work from what they did. But that's not okay. You can't do that, right? I'll pull back from the Nazis. There's a guy named Stanley Milgram. This is one of the most famous psychological experiments in history, really. This is here in the United States. So Milgram did the famous electrocution tests. And what he did was he would he'd bring the subject in, and another subject would be in another room. They'd be looking at each other through a glass. And one would be hooked up to all sorts of electric diodes. The other one has a panel with a bunch of different buttons on it. And the buttons start at 1 and they go up to 14. And the researcher tells the guy with the panel, okay, ask him a question, ask him this question. If he gets it right, good. If he gets it wrong, flip the button, the first button. And so the guy gets it wrong and he flips the first button and it delivers a mild electrical shock. And the guy on the other side of the screen is like, ow, the heck? Right? And so they keep doing this. And the guy gets another one wrong. So he flips the second one, stronger shock. And it keeps going and they get up to like 8. And now we're dealing with like actual damage electrocution happening where the guy's actually getting like shocked and they're screaming. And they're getting up towards the end and the person is begging and screaming to please God, make it stop. Please let me out. You're killing me. And we're talking about lethal levels of electricity being delivered to this person. And the researcher is telling the person flipping the buttons, nope, you have to keep going. You signed the informed consent. We're going to keep going. Keep going. And the truth is that there was no electric shock, and the person getting the electric shock was an actor. And the research was actually about obedience to authority. And what Stanley Milgram was trying to find out is just because a person is there in a white lab coat telling you have to do this, is somebody going to continue to deliver increasingly lethal levels of pain and electric shock to somebody they don't know who's begging them to stop? Will you commit this heinous act of torture and murder just because somebody in a lab coat is telling you to do it? And the answer, sadly, is overwhelmingly, yeah. Yeah, the vast majority of the people researched actually killed the person that they were electrocuting. Now, of course, there was no real damage done. There was no real death that occurred. And when Milgram went and informed these people that there was no real death, the amount of psychological trauma that some of these people went through, because in their mind, they just tortured and killed somebody, right? And in one of the most horrible ways possible. And these are people who never thought themselves capable of acts of violence like this at all. We're talking about just your average Joe Schmoes off the street, right? And now they realize they're capable of murder just because some dude in a white coat told them to be. And so the psychological effect of the Milgram experiments on these people was very detrimental. People committed suicide. People ended up in years and years of therapy, as you may imagine. Did we learn a lot from the Milgram experiments? Yeah, you better believe we did. We learned a lot about obedience to authority and the dangers of groupthink, and how people, not groupthink, sorry, that was the wrong word. That was a different experiment. But we learned a lot about the dangers of obedience to authority and what people will really do when they're told to, when they think they're being ordered to. And taking it back to the Nazis, one of the Nazis' most common defenses when the Nuremberg trial started was, hey, we were just following orders. Hey, yeah, I know I tortured and killed all those people, but I was just following orders, right? Do we learn a lot from the Milgram experiments? Yeah, you bet we did. We learned a whole lot from the Milgram experiments. By design, it was ingenious. By ethics, it was evil. Okay, you can't do that anymore. Okay, if you tried to run a Milgram experiment right now, if you tried to recreate the Milgram experiments, you'd end up in prison. Okay, you cannot do that. So just because research was unethical does not mean we did not learn something from it. So I guess the lesson here is, okay, look back in time, learn something from it, but we can't do that again. We got to be better, and we got to figure out other ways to get to the information we need. Because at the end of the day, why are we researching? We're researching to help people. We're researching to help society. We're researching to help humankind be better at whatever, right? Just be better. And we can't make humankind be better by torturing and killing people, because that is in and of itself worse. All right. So sorry to preach to you there, but this is a lecture about ethics and legal responsibility. When you take on the role of psychologist, be it a teacher, a researcher, a clinician, a doctor, or you take on a role that just deals with psychology, like a doctor, a medical doctor, or a law enforcement officer, or a lawyer, or a social worker, or anything, there's a huge responsibility that you take on. Because when you say somebody, I had a 16-year-old boy once that I recommended to the court as having, well, he was, back then we called it a sociopath, and I got a doctor's opinion. This kid ended up in a mental institution at 16 years old with what started with my recommendation. Okay. And I don't have any guilt about that, because I believe myself to have been right, and I believe he absolutely was going to murder his baby sister. But that's heavy, man, right? That's heavy to get a 16-year-old committed into a mental institution and labeled with one of the big bad labels that we can throw on somebody. So as you go forward with your education of this, don't take it lightly. Don't take it lightly. It's all fun and games until it's not. Okay, we're here to help people. We're here to make people's lives better. We're here to improve people's lives, and we can very easily do the exact opposite if we're not careful. All right, guys, that is it for this class. Thank you so much for being a part of my class. I hope to see you in future classes. Good luck with all your academic pursuits, and good luck in your lives. Aloha. I love you.